Hey, welcome to another edition of the Gentleman Grachowski Show. I'm your host, Larry, and I've got some upsetting news. One of our guests that we had last year twice, Richard Lertzman, he had passed away a few weeks ago. He had written a couple books. I interviewed him on two of the books he wrote, the Dr. Feelgood case book and in the Rat Pack. Uh, he passed away unexpectedly, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to kind of check out some of the interviews that I did with him on the Rat Pack because it was some really good stuff. And, it's a shame that I'm not able to talk to him again. But I think that you guys will enjoy this video here of my interview with Richard Lurchman on the Rat Pack. So please, if you could take a chance, the Life and Times of Hollywood is his website. He still has stuff up there. It's you can check it out and check out some of his past work, and you can also take a look at his books that he wrote. But Rich Lertzman. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode, a special encore episode of my interview with Richard Lertzman, who passed away unexpectedly a couple weeks ago. Got the authors of the new book, Deconstructing the Rat Pack, Joey, the Mob, and the Summit. We got Richard Lertzman and Lon Davis here. Welcome to the broadcast, guys.
Hey, Larry.
Now, for a lot of people, maybe under 30 years old, they don't really know who the Rat Pack is. Can you tell us about, give us an overall idea of who the Rat Pack were? Because I happen to know, and obviously you guys know about them. But tell some of the younger viewers out there who the Rat Pack were and why they were important in our pop culture.
In 1960, the sounds of Elvis Presley were coming out. The Beatles were yet to come. But at that time, the powerhouse in the entertainment world were Frank, Dean, and Sammy. And Frank Sinatra's songs and Dean Martin's songs were selling like crazy. So they got together for a 21-day appearance in Las Vegas, and they called it the Summit. And at the Summit in Las Vegas, which was designed to put Las Vegas on the map, they had, I think, with Sammy Davis Jr., with Frank Sinatra, with Dean Martin, with Joey Bishop and Peter Lawford. They exploded for 20 days in an event that was a lot like Woodstock, that was the key note of that era. And for 20 days, people came from all over the world. People came to see it. Cameras came, and it was like the great event of that era. And also at that event was President John Kennedy, who's his father, Joe Kennedy, made him go to this event to be a peer with them, to seem cool and seem of that time. And Kennedy, it really set off his campaign toward becoming president of the United States. So it was a 20-day period. Well, while they were making that show, doing the show at nights in Las Vegas, they were shooting the film Ocean's 11. And Ocean's 11 was shot in Las Vegas during the day, and at night they were doing those summit shows for 20 days. And that's really the big period known as for the Rat Pack. And it was supposed to be the swinging hip era. And it was a short-lived era because it was eclipsed later by the Beatles and the onslaught of modern rock and roll.
And what people don't realize that back in the day, Las Vegas was a dusty little town, you said there. But now we know it as just the city of lights and the city of entertainment. So back then, nothing was happening in Vegas. It was just getting started.
It really was. I think that Las Vegas, if you see pictures of it from the old days, it really was nothing, just a strip and a few hotels and stuff. And it really took the mobsters of that time to foresee what it was going to be and to make it an entertainment mecca, the gambling capital of the world, entertainment capital of the world. Those guys were truly visionaries. And what's interesting to me is that Rick, my writing partner, knew so many of these mobsters personally. He was even related to a couple. I'm not casting any aspersions on his family or on him, although that could certainly be warranted. What I'm thinking, however, is that these guys were very quick to talk about those days, to explain that they really were there at the forefront and that they envisioned Las Vegas as this multi-billion-dollar complex that it is today. It's hard to imagine, but they had that kind of foresight, they had that kind of power, they had the kind of money, and of course, more importantly, they had the greatest entertainers in the world, especially the man, Frank Sinatra. And because of him, Las Vegas became what we now call Sin City.
Now, do you think that the mob wanted they needed an act like the Rat Pack, Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, Dean Martin? Do you think they really needed that to make their image a little bit more friendly? Not that just of a gambling town, just entertainment there.
Oh, Larry, they needed the impetus of these guys to put them on the map. And they wanted to do it in a big way, not just in shows, but that was Ocean's 11 was planned out. Other films were planned out. They had a vision, a blueprint to put it on the map. But Frank Sinatra owned 9% of the Sands Casino. And he was smart enough to come to them he came to them with this plan. And the plan was, I'll put together my friends, we'll put together a show, we'll do a movie. And they had seen in some other shows that the reaction to people watched, like Danny Thomas had shot a show in Las Vegas, and they saw the reaction, but they were at the height of their fame and popularity. And the mobsters were really savvy guys. And I got to meet guys like Mo Dalitz, who created the Sands, and he worked with Momo Giancana and all these mobsters, Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, and so I got to meet Mo Dalitz, who explained it to me. Carl Cohn was the head of the Sands Hotel. He was 6'8". He was an ex-Golden Glove boxer, and he was an amazing, smart guy. But he looked like this tough guy who talked like this, And Carl Cohn ran the Sands, and when Sinatra, after the summit and after the Rat Pack, started one night, he was drunk and he was throwing things around and he was tossing things at dealers. He went to Carl Cohn, said, "Frank, calm down." And Frank Sinatra looked at him and goes, "You can't tell me what to do." And Frank being 5'6" or 7, and Carl 6'9", Frank took a swing at Carl. So Carl ducked and said, "Frank, calm down." And this was his moneymaker. But then Frank hit him when he turned his face for a second. Frank hit Carl square in the jaw, and Carl just looked at him, pulled back, and hit him square in the mouth. Frank's caps flew all over everywhere. Frank's teeth flew out. I mean, Carl reacted all of a sudden as an ex-boxer. He felt somebody hit him. So these guys knew their talent, and they knew that they would put them on the map. And Frank was a big part of it, and all these mobsters were a big part of it. And Dean and Joey and Peter and Sammy were just all good in for the ride.
You got Dean Martin. He obviously a performer, he's singer, actor. Sammy Davis Jr. Joey Bishop was more of a comedian. How does Peter Lawford really fit into this? Because I don't think his persona traveled well in time and history. He's kind of like, who's that guy? Oh, he's what do you? How would
Well, Peter Lawford, yeah.
Peter Lawford.
Peter Lawford was pretty much a B actor. He did work for MGM. He was a well-known actor in his time in the 40s and 50s, but his real claim to fame was that he married JFK's sister. And actually, Frank cozied up to Peter, I think, because of that connection. Frank saw himself as a kingmaker and enjoyed that kind of position. And Peter Lawford was his entree to JFK. And I think that Frank's nickname for Peter Lawford was Brother-in Lawford. That was Frank's joke. And it was a great relationship in that they were able to incorporate him into the show, although I don't know what perceivable talent he had. He was an actor. He could read lines well, but he couldn't sing. He wasn't funny. He was kind of good looking, considered to be good looking at that time. And with Frank and Dean, I mean, there was so much charisma on that stage that Peter Lawford could sort of blend in. And it was not quite as incongruous as you might think. You know, they also wrote funny lines for him, and, you know, they had him pretending to be a waiter, you know, in the audience. And this was, of course, after JFK won. And Peter Lawford's line was, "Can you imagine the job they'd have me doing if he hadn't won?" So, you know, I mean, that's the kind of thing. So they used that. Now, this didn't really last too long, if I may tell the story. After Frank was, after JFK was elected, there was an opportunity, I believe, for JFK to come to, it wasn't Los Angeles. I think it was Las Vegas. Yeah, Las Vegas, and to stay with Frank at his compound. And Frank had gone apparently to a lot of trouble, even putting in a helicopter pad, you know, or something to welcome this, you know, White House helicopter and whatnot. And suddenly, I think it was Bobby Kennedy who decided that that wasn't the best kind of reputation for, you know, for his brother to be hobnobbing with this saloon entertainer who supposedly had mob connections. So he basically just told him, you know, at least he had Peter Lawford tell him, "I'm sorry to say this, Frank, but JFK is not coming. He's staying at Bing Crosby's compound." Well, Bing Crosby was a Republican. Frank was a Democrat at that time. And this offended him greatly. And he said to Peter Lawford, he said, "Peter, are you listening carefully?" And Peter said, "Yes." He took the phone and slammed it down. And that was the last time he ever spoke to Peter Lawford, practically the last time he ever mentioned him. So that was Peter Lawford's brief reign in the Rat Pack and why he fit into that particular group of entertainers.
That would probably upset someone with an ego. I'm sure that would upset you. The president of the United States sleeps in someone else's house instead of the person that maybe thinks he was responsible for getting him into the office. We're sitting here with Richard Lertzman and Lon Davis, and they have the book Deconstructing the Rat Pack, Joey, the Mob, and the Summit. Now, in the book, there, in the title right there, it says Joey. I would think Frank Sinatra would be the name mentioned in there, but tell us what the significance of Joey Bishop is in the title of the book.
I spent a lot of time with Joey Bishop, and I wanted to show the power of the Rat Pack, that the Rat Pack can take a pretty mediocre, pretty cruddy comedian named Joey Bishop and turn him into a superstar just by association. Joey Bishop was the fair-haired boy of the mobsters. And so they placed him with Frank Sinatra as his opening act. And Joey became, because of Sinatra, the superstar of comedy. And he was hardly funny. He had every word that he seemed witty was written by Gary Marshall or by other comedy writers. You know, he never was like brilliantly smart. So I went to meet him about 10 times at his house. He lived in a compound in Newport Beach in California called Lido. And he was the most bitter, angry. And he had the delusion that he was the glue of the Rat Pack, that the Rat Pack depended on Joey Bishop. Now, the fact is they could have put any nothing comedian, Corbett Monica, anybody could have done that role, because it was Sinatra, Dean, and Sammy that really carried it. So Joey became carried away with himself and became huge. He got his own situation comedy that ran for 4 years on NBC and CBS. He insulted Marlo Thomas. He said, whose father owned the show, Danny Thomas. He insulted everybody around. He attacked writers. He beat up a writer named Milt Josephsberg, who wrote for Jack Benny and Lucille Ball. And he beat him up because Joey was mad that one of the episodes of his show, he played his twin cousin, and his cousin was getting more laughs than Joey. And Joey was playing the role. and he was mad that his cousin was getting more laughs. So he was an insane guy that got his head swelled. And so we looked through Joey's eyes at the Rat Pack, how he got into it, and how this mediocre comic really became known only because of Frank, Dean, and Sammy. So Joey takes us through the Rat Pack, and I spent a lot of time with Joey, giving us a lot of insights of the Rat Pack and a lot of insights into the rackets. Joey also was at a murder at Rondelli's restaurant in 1959 with the infamous Mickey Cohn, who Harvey Keitel played in Bugsy. And Joey was the witness to this murder. So Joey was actually the one who really knew the racketeers. And he stood up for Mickey Cohn, the only person at Mickey's murder trial of this guy that he hit on Ventura Boulevard in Los Angeles.
Well, that's definitely the person you want to stick up for, the mob, I guess, right? you went against them, something would have gone wrong. So that probably alone tells you why he became part of the superstar group of the early 60s there, right?
That's exactly it. When you knew those racketeers at that time, he had the pull and the sway. But when he insulted Frank Sinatra and refused to do a favor for Frank Sinatra, appearing somewhere, that was the end of Joey. So Joey lasted for about another 7-8 years, and then he disappeared until from 1970 on. You didn't hear much about Joey Bishop. He hosted the Tonight Show a few times, and you didn't hear about him. And he disappeared into obscurity for 40 years. And he had the money, but he lived up he burned a lot of bridges in Hollywood.
Oh, okay. Dean Martin, he was probably not what you assumed he was. Everyone thinks he was a drunk and maybe a bumbling drunk or something along those lines. Was it true that Dean Martin wasn't really into alcohol as much as you may say?
Dean Martin was a great entertainer. And after being discovered as part of Martin and Lewis, and of course they had a very bitter breakup in 1956, and Dean wanted to reestablish himself as an entertainer. He sort of took over Joey Lewis's role as a happy drunk. And of course, he wasn't. He always had apple juice in his glass instead of scotch. Granted, he did drink, and he drank later in life. But Dean was a very savvy entertainer. He was from the same small town that my father was, Steubenville, Ohio. He was born in 1917. And he came up basically from nothing. And he was a nice looking guy, but he had an awfully large nose. And the great comedian Lou Costello paid to have Dean's nose fixed because he saw this young man's potential. And indeed, he had great potential. He wasn't a great singer, but he was a great entertainer. He was very funny, and he knew how to completely express this character that he was playing with the cigarette and the booze and the girls. And he did it for decades, and he did it better than anybody possibly could. And Dean Martin was not a really gregarious man, unlike his image. He seemed like the kind of guy anybody could have a drink with. The truth is, he was very much a loner. He spent a lot of his time, especially late in his life, battling depression and various other problems. And he wasn't a particularly happy man, I wouldn't say at the end, but Dean Martin always held his own. He and Frank and Sammy were just magical together.
And speaking of Sammy, we saved the best for last year. Sammy Davis Jr. As I growing up, he was always a superstar. He was always a name. People don't realize is back in the 60s and probably early 50s when Sammy Davis Jr. first became performing, he was because of the color barrier, he was kind of edgy, wasn't he?
He was really edgy. He was part of his uncle and his father called the Will Maston Trio. Sammy was an entertainer from the 30s on, and energy. But at the time of the Rat Pack, he was dating a blonde, Swedish, gorgeous girl named May Britt. And May Britt, who he later married, Sammy with May Britt in the 1960s was like, the biggest nightmare, that you can imagine of that, especially in that really racist time. Sammy came to Las Vegas during the summit, and Sammy, it was so racist that when Sammy went to swim at the pool at the Sands Hotel, and a gambler complained that a black man was in the pool, they drained the pool just because Sammy was in it. Sammy wasn't allowed to sleep at the Sands Hotel. He had to sleep in the downtown area restricted for blacks. But Sammy had this great edge, this great energy, and this great ability to be a super entertainer of all types. And Frank had great respect for him. In 57 or 58, Sammy lost his eye in a car accident. And he didn't think he'd ever dance again because he lost his balance. And Frank came, and Frank is the one who coached Sammy during that period and got Sammy to learn his balance back, to get his confidence back. And that's why Frank included him. And Frank included him because Frank was one of the first really progressive entertainers that really pushed out. He didn't have Frank had no prejudices. Frank really believed Frank loved Cab Calloway and Duke Ellington and Ella Fitzgerald, and he always featured that. So Sammy was an incredible talent that it's pretty much been forgotten by a lot of people by today.
Now, Ocean's 11 became a pretty big hit back in the 1960s. Obviously the Rat Pack had their history, what they accomplished, what they helped Vegas, helped out. Is there anything about the Rat Pack that maybe we don't know that you could share with us, or anything you found out that maybe you didn't know that was a surprise to you when you were writing this book?
I think the biggest surprise is that for years we have listened and heard all the myths about the Rat Pack. They were these swinging guys who had all these broads, to use Frank's word, and they were up all night, with women, and they were working all day, and they were tireless, and they were crazy, and they did nothing but drink. The fact of the matter is, they were mature men in their mid-40s, and they had families, and they were businessmen. And this whole image of them as swingers, as this book will prove, really was a part of the legend. And they were just people, and they were subject to the same weaknesses of any man who's getting on in years. And they had to get plenty of rest, and they had to do what they were going to do. And they were very focused entertainers, very focused businessmen. But beyond that, they weren't the superhuman individuals that people in various movies and in various tribute acts paint them up as. The Rat Pack has entered into entertainment mythology, and life, of course, is a lot more prosaic than that. And I think that's one of the things that is definitely revealed in this book for the very first time ever. And speaking of the book, if you're interested in reading it, and I really hope you are, it is available right now for pre-sale on Amazon.com. So I personally can't wait to read it myself. So anyway, that's the great thing about the Rat Pack. There are things that we are learning even now, and that's thanks to so many of Rick's amazingly exclusive interviews.
There you go, Rick. How do you tap that?
Yeah, well, it was such an interesting book to interview. I interviewed everybody. Dina Martin told us great stories. She told us a great Dean Martin story that Dean's wife, Jeannie, would have a party at her house, and she would throw a party, and Dean would get bored. At 8:30, he would go up to his bedroom, turn on Westerns, And then he would hear the noise downstairs. So he called the Beverly Hills police and said, there's a horrible party going on. Could you please quiet them down? And he gave him his address, and he reported it and got his house raided while he was in bed. So I got there's some great exclusive interviews. Bobby Slayton, this great comic who just did Curb Your Enthusiasm. Bobby gave me this great interview about meeting Joey and Frank, and Bobby played Joey in the 1989 or 1990 HBO movie The Rat Pack with Joe Mantegna and Ray Liotta. I talked to Joe Mantegna, another Chicago boy, and a lot of people who just loved the Rat Pack and knew the Rat Pack, and I talked to their family members and people, and it was just a blast talking to these people and really learning about the Rat Pack.
And guys, do you think Vegas would be what it is today if it wasn't for the Rat Pack?
I can tell you it would not. The Rat Pack defined Vegas. One of the great things about Frank Sinatra, to say he's the greatest entertainer who ever lived is an understatement. And to the man, he was so brilliant. I was just watching a concert of his before this show, and I was lucky enough to be able to see him in concert once in 1978. What a magnificent talent, and the most charismatic man, I believe, and the most talented man who's ever lived. But Frank was so big in Las Vegas that they didn't even need to put his name on the marquee. All they had to say was, he's here. And people knew what that meant. There's only one Frank Sinatra. He defined Las Vegas. And I believe that if it hadn't been for him and for the Rat Pack and for that amazing summit, which took place, and like Rick said, brought attention from all over the world, no, I don't think Las Vegas would be what it is today. Not in any means, no.
Right. Gentlemen, thanks for stopping by. Richard Lertzman, Lon Davis, again, Deconstructing the Rat Pack, Joey, the Mob, and the Summit. And it's going to be out on Amazon. You can always check it out. And lifeandtimesofhollywood.com is your website, right, Richard?
Yep, Life and Times of Hollywood. In the book debuts today on Amazon, goes for pre-sale in book and Kindle. And the Lon and Rick Christmas Club needs enhancement.
There you go. There you go. Sounds good to me. All right, gentlemen, thanks for stopping by the broadcast. We'll hopefully have you guys on some other time. And then I know you guys mentioned earlier that you both guys were involved in some Three Stooges stories. Maybe you guys can come by and talk about something like that in the future. Thank you, gentlemen, for stopping by. This is the Gentleman Gurchowski Show. We'll be back after this. Thank you.